be older. It is very rare for any organization to have donors who are young. The Obama campaign claimed that they had all these young people that were donors to their campaign, and they did have a lot of donors. But I've been to conferences, fundraising conferences, where the Obama campaign people spoke. And their average age for their donors was 64 years old, which is not all that different than the average donor for our campaigns. There's a reason why donors are older. Because to give money, you have to have money. When you're a young person, you graduate from high school, and let's say you're on the college track, you go to 2 years, 4 years, 8 years of college. You graduate from college, you have usually lots of student loans, unless you're fortunate to be born into a family where they can pay for the college for you. So you graduate with a lot of student loans that you have to pay back. You're 20-some years old, you need a place to live, because you don't want to be on mom and dad's couch. So you get an apartment, and you have to pay for it. And you have to have some way to get to work, so you have to buy a car. And you have to put food on the table, so you have to do that. And then you get your first job, and as you know, when you're getting your first job, you start out at the lowest rung, and you have to work your way up over time. So there's not a lot of money to go around, and usually the month runs out before, or the pay runs out before the month does. And so there's no money to give away, because there's not even money to pay the bills. There's not even money to cover all of the loan payments and everything else. And then you get married, and then comes more expenses. A bigger house for his and her, and a car for his and her, and cell phones for his and her, and life insurance, and all the other responsibilities that come with starting a life together. And then a little ways down the road, you start having babies, and then there's baby expenses, and starts with diapers and clothes and formula, and then before you know it, you're buying school books and backpacks and sports equipment and bicycles and summer camp and private schools, and then you're paying college for your children, and you still don't have money. And then comes weddings, your children's weddings, and the expenses that go along with those. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're 55, 60 years old, and your kids are happily married and out on their own, and it's just you and your spouse, and you're in your prime earning years. You're making more money than you'll ever make in your entire life. And there's just the two of you. And the house is getting close to being paid for, and maybe the cars are paid off, and the student loans were long ago paid off. And then all of a sudden you say, we've got a little bit of extra money. And then when somebody asks for a contribution to help build an addition onto the church, you give. Or when your college alma mater calls on you and says, we're building a new science center, you give. And when the fire department calls and says, we need a new fire truck, can you give $100? You give. And you start giving. But you start giving because you have the ability to give. And then the older people get, they go into their 60s, they retire, they're in their 70s, they're having to start cashing in IRAs and other investments. And if they were good investors over the years, they have a lot of investments, and the money starts coming in, and then they realize this whole American dream thing really is for real. And here they are in their 70s or in their 80s, and by golly, they've actually accumulated some fairly significant wealth. My parents are 85 years old, and they asked me to be the executor of their estate, so I had to sit down with them and go over all of their investments. I had no idea the things that they had invested in, stocks and bonds and municipal bonds and IRA accounts and pieces of land and rental properties and this and that. And I added it all up, and I was very surprised at how large an estate they have. And a lot of people who are in their 70s and 80s realize that. But that's when people start giving the most. So I serve on a lot of boards, and I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations. Aside from my fundraising business, I do this just on my own as a private citizen. But I've been on church boards, I've been on college boards, I've been on nonprofit boards, I've been on community service boards. And when we're raising money in organizations just like yours, what I find is the same. It doesn't matter if it's a church or a college or a community charity. The donors tend to be older. That's almost across the board the case. Now you will, occasionally you'll have an exception, you'll have a young person who gives, and that's a wonderful thing. But by and large, donors are older. So when you're looking for donors and you're trying to figure out who the donors are, one of the things to keep in mind is age. So therefore, people who live in country clubs, people who live in age-restricted communities, you're much more likely to find donors there than you are the at-large population. Obviously, the people who give can be either wealthy or not wealthy. It doesn't matter, but wealthier people can obviously have more resources and have more to give. So if you're looking for larger gifts, you have to go to people who have the ability to give larger gifts. And as you're planning your fundraising events, whether it's an event or a direct mail campaign or a telephone solicitation campaign or direct solicitation, it's like Jesse James said when he was asked why did he rob banks, and he said because that's where the money is. So when you're fundraising, you want to go where the money is. So you want to look for areas of apparent or obvious wealth. Neighborhoods are always a good way to localize wealth. I mean, I could drive right around here for about 30 minutes and I could come back and I could tell you probably 5 neighborhoods that you should go to find your donors, because you can just look at it and you can tell this is where people with wealth live. So you can target, you have the ability to target your fundraising apparatus to specific neighborhoods that have wealthy people who live there. You can look for donors in a lot of different places where they will rise to the top and they'll become their names will become public information. Because I'm a fundraiser, because this is what I do for a living, I always notice this when I go anywhere. Just the other day I was in the Loudon Hospital Center, which is right across from my office. My sister-in-law was in the hospital. And as I walked down the hallway to her room, on the hallway, on the walls, are mounted the names of people who have made major gifts to the hospital. And major gifts, we're talking $10, $25, $50, $100,000. And their names are engraved in their own plaques on the walls of the hospital. That might be a good place to look for donors. You know, you probably all go to the hospital from time to time to visit somebody. Well, as you're walking down the halls, look on the walls and see, and take your cell phone out and walk down the hall and take pictures. But if you are someone who knows a lot about the community that you live in, and you know a lot of the people in the community that you live in, you're likely to see some names of people that you recognize. Another way to find out about who donors are is from invitations that you might receive. You all probably receive from time to time invitations in the mail to a fundraiser. It might be for the hospital, it might be for a local charity, it might be for a golf tournament, but in that invitation, more likely than not, you're gonna see something called a host committee. Well, the people that are on that host committee are there for a reason. They're the ones who have underwritten all the cost of the event. So they are, by definition, they are major donors. So I just make a habit whenever I receive an invitation, which for me is about every other day. When I receive an invitation in the mail, I just scan that invitation and file it away in my invitation file. Because I know that when I'm looking for donors, I can go back and look through those invitations to find out who the donors are. A lot of organizations that raise money publish what is typically called an annual report. Your hospital or your hospital auxiliary organization will publish an annual report. Let me just go down the list of some things that I get every year that I